Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, whatever time it is that you're viewing this. Good to have you with us. Welcome to another of the pre-recorded mini masterclasses with our lovely presenters. My name's Eddie Ludlow. I'm founder of the Whiskey Lounge, and I'm very proud to present this to you. So we have with us today, I'm glad to say, Mr. Ollie Chilton, who is kind of overseer of stuff at Elixir Distillers. And I'm going to bring him in now, and he's going to talk to us about Port Askaig 100 proof. Hey, Ollie, how you doing, man?
I'm good. That's the best job title I've been given so far.
Well, I couldn't remember, to be honest, what your job title was, and I knew you wouldn't mind me kind of riffing.
No, I'm pretty much let people make it up as we go along anyway.
I suppose doer of things might be even better, actually.
Yeah.
I think everyone comes to you when they need something done.
Well, that sounds ominous, doesn't it?
Yeah. But anyway, it's nice to see you. Sorry we're not able to meet up in person just yet, but we're not far off, fingers crossed, and all that. But delighted that you could make it onto our little broadcast, so appreciate you coming along. Now, obviously, I've known you for many, many years, since before I was grey, and enjoyed your company on many occasions and many drams and many beers, and will do again. But there's unfortunate few viewers that might not know who you are and what you do. So if you could just quickly fill us in on what you do, that would be great.
Sure. So I look after the kind of overall business of Elixir Distillers. We're an independent bottler, so we buy casks from distillers, brokers, etc., and then bottle them, sometimes as single casks, sometimes as part of batches. We have a variety of labels, such as Port Askaig, which we're going to be talking about today. And my main day-to-day job is the buying of casks, the managing of that stock, the selecting, blending, and then bottling of it. So it's I drink for a living. That's essentially it.
That's the most succinct introduction of oneself I've heard for some time, Ollie. I congratulate you.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Okay, so tell us about the Port Askaig 100 proof that we're tasting today.
So Port Askaig 100 proof, in many ways, was the first bottling we did under the Port Askaig label. It was originally called Port Askaig Cask Strength. Way back in 2009. It was originally brought out because my boss Sukhinder, he owns a retail shop called the Whiskey Exchange. He had a shop in London Bridge inside Vinopolis, and at the time it was becoming more difficult to get cask strength Islay. I think the 10-year-old cask strength had just been moved to a US only / Islay availability. And Sukhinder wanted a kind of cask strength Islay whiskey on his shelf. He also really loved Kalila, which was the stock we were able to buy at the time, which is very soft, fragrant, kind of quite sweet and citrusy. And very much the idea of Port Askaig was that kind of entry into Islay and getting people into smoky whiskey. We relaunched it as 100 proof in 2014. So 100 proof being the strength, it's 57.1% alcohol. It comes out of cask normally around 58 and a half. And then we reduce it down, mainly because it makes my life easy in terms of labeling. I'd love to give you a better, more liquid-based reason for that. Although a little bit of water does help, it does make it a bit sweeter. And in terms of the actual bottling and what we do, as an independent bottler, our job is to go and buy casks from everywhere. So we're sitting on 10,000 upwards of 10,000 casks of whiskey from a variety of different distilleries all across Scotland and indeed the world. We have a very heavy focus on Islay, mainly because both me and my boss are a little bit obsessed with the liquid. And we buy an awful lot of Kalila and Bunnahabhain and Lefroy particularly. Port Askaig as a label doesn't have a distillery name on it. We never say which distillery is in the bottle on the label. But 100 proof always comes from the same distillery. It always comes from the north of Islay, always comes from Kalila. And for that, because of the reason that Kalila delivers this kind of lovely citrus freshness that makes it really approachable. Now, it's not done as single casks, it's done as small batches. We bottle about 50 casks at a time, give or take. And the reason 50 casks is because, as I've known Eddie a long time, my family's all from Yorkshire, and I spent a ridiculous amount of time getting drunk with Mr. Ludlow there. And one thing I learned is that you've got to economize, and it's a lot cheaper to move 50 casks than any other number, because that's how many fits on a wagon nicely. The other thing about 50 casks that works for us is it's a manageable number. So when you're buying lots of whiskey, you don't necessarily try every cask individually when you're purchasing, or if you're laying down stock, like you're buying new fill, like we do. Though you obviously check the stock at the end, you don't always know where it's going to be at the beginning. So by moving 50, 60 casks at a time, we can go along the line, we can go to the bottling hall, we can check every single cask and make sure that it fits the profile of the bottling, which gives us a level of consistency, though I would never want to claim, nor would I want it to be completely consistent every time, because that's part of the joy.
Indeed.
Slightly less succinct there. Okay.
Since when did you learn to economize from me? I don't recollect that.
No, I didn't economize from you, Eddie. I economized from living in Yorkshire. You're an oddity in that county, frankly. I'm not sure why they let you stay.
Well, there's no laws yet against bearded strangers in Yorkshire.
It's coming.
I've been here close to 20 years, so I know that will never make me a resident or from Yorkshire. But
yeah. You have to be careful. I have never said that I'm from Yorkshire because I wasn't born there, and I still vividly remember doing a tasting it was actually on Talisker in Ilkley, and in a pub in Ilkley, and I walked up to these guys and said, would you like to try some whiskey? And they say, you're not Scottish. And I went, no, I'm not. And they said, you're not even Yorkshire. I said, well, my mum's from Pickering. And they went, that's North Yorkshire. I was like, great, can't even get arrested. And then I said, the whiskey's free. And they were like, oh, okay, you can sit down.
Brilliant. Nowhere else would you get that kind of response.
No.
So 100 proof is always Kalila, you said.
So 100 proof is always Kalila because we are looking for a level of consistency. So we've always said that we don't name the distillery on the bottle. That's quite important to us for a couple of reasons. To start with, when we started bottling Port Askaig, it was part of the agreement of buying the casks. They weren't bought direct, but as part of that, they weren't supposed to be used as named stock. Nowadays, I have a very different agreement. So we could theoretically name the stock on the bottle if we wanted to. But actually what happened over the years was that we started using other distilleries. So in around 2015, it was really difficult to buy, from about 2011 to 2015, it was really difficult to buy a lot of Islay stock. So we were sitting on quite a lot of Lefroy, very fruity Lefroy. So I used that for a couple of batches of 15-year-old and 16-year-old. And then we've used peated Bunnahabhain as well for a couple of limited editions. And what we ended up focusing on was not the distillery, but instead the style. So the idea of kind of elegant Islay, fruit-driven Islay, which it's actually a common trait across most of the distilleries in Islay, is this elegance and fruit, even more than peat, to be frank. So nowadays what we do is we tend to use the same distillery for regular ongoing releases, so there's some consistency there. But when we come to limited editions or small batches, we're quite happy to go look at other distilleries as long as they kind of fit that profile. So for instance, we might use Lefroy when it's much older because it tends to be much more fruit driven and much more elegant. And again, some of the Bunnahabhains we've either managed the stock, marrying it with unpeated and peated stock to achieve that.
But I think that what I was going to get at is that yourselves and independent bottlers around the world, really, the Caol Ila for them is great because it's so consistent and just such a lovely clean spirit.
Yeah, well, 100% for me, it's the nicest spirit to work with for those reasons. It's also, it's a big distillery. They make 6 million litres, and it's traditionally a blending house. So it's traditionally a distillery for blenders, which means you do tend to find more of it as an independent bottler, because you largely live off that market. But the thing that really kind of makes it stand out from a lot of the makes on Islay is the freshness and the cleanness. They have they basically fill their stills relatively low, so you tend to get more copper contact, more reflux, which makes for a much lighter spirit. I mean, from a phenol point of view, it's essentially the same as Lagavulin, but from an end spirit point of view, it's very, very different. I always think of it as this be kind of lemon zest note that runs through almost every Caol Ila. And then, as you say, from a consistency point of view, I've always thought if you bottle a bad Caol Ila as an independent bottler, then you have to give your keys and your children, because clearly you're an irresponsible adult. So, you shouldn't be allowed to own a house and or have kids. And I genuinely think you have to do something to mess that up, if that makes sense.
So the next question doesn't really apply to you in terms of quirks of production process, because obviously you're not doing the production. Are you allowed to talk about developments on Islay, or?
Yeah, I can talk about developments on Islay. I can talk about quirks. I can give you a really lovely one, actually.
Okay.
So it's one of my favorite misnomers about independent bottlers is that you, as an independent bottler, your job is to wander into a warehouse and it's all romantic, and you choose a cask, and that's not really how the day-to-day works. Most of what we do is very sadly done on spreadsheets. So I'll be doing deals on 1,000 litres, 2,000 litres, 10,000 litres of make or stock. And when you buy that, if you're buying big quantities, you might get a representative sample, which, one of the oddities of whiskey is every cask is different. So if they give you a representative sample of one cask, that doesn't mean that the cask next to it's going to taste the same. So when we're doing Port Askaig 100 proof, as an example, we'll be pulling over normally around 60 casks of whiskey. And we do that because when you go to bottle and you walk down that line, it's not just the casks are different. You also find that some of the descriptions on the wood is slightly wrong. So you might think through a lot of marketing that all distillery companies have always kept really good track of all their wood. It's not the case. The majority of whiskey is still made for blending. The majority of wood seems to be largely viewed as wood, certainly by some distillery companies. So for instance, refill could be anything from a cask that was first used 10 years ago and was maybe used for 3 years for grain, and then another 5 years for something else, and is now being used a third time. Or it could be a piece of wood that's been used for the last 40 years. And it doesn't tell you that when you buy the cask or on the paperwork. You only find that out when you walk in. A few years ago, in fact, in the last batch of 100 proof we just run, my ops manager found 2 refill sherry hogsheads, both that said Gonzalez bias on the side. But on our sheets, they just say refill wood. So it's one of the things that we've become, that's become very important to us, is that quality control. And it's not that those whiskies are bad by any stretch. In fact, 9 times out of 10, the odd ones that you find are the ones you take out and you bottle as a single cask for single malts of Scotland or for something else that you're doing. But they certainly would mess up the kind of consistency of what you do day to day.
So obviously, well, not necessarily obviously, but, I've known a while, and it's a kind of badly kept secret about what's going on with you guys on Islay. And I know that it's a kind of labor of love for you, but can you tell us, as much as possible what you're trying to do on Islay and where you're up to?
Yeah. So, well, we've sent press releases out now, so we're allowed to talk about pretty much everything. Since about 2014, we've been working on a project to build a distillery on the south coast of Islay. Taken our time, as we do on many things, as anyone who's worked with us will tell you. The concept was always to build a distillery to make ourselves self-sufficient, but also to be part of a heritage that we love. I don't like to say that we want to be part of an island we love. I love Islay. I love going there. It's been somewhere that I've visited both work professionally and personally for a very long time, and many of my best memories are there. But actually, from a business point of view, it's much more driven by the liquid. Islay's special because even if you look at it today and just bottles on shelves, there are 8/9 distilleries, depending on how you want to count them, that have all produced not just good whiskey, but truly outstanding, exceptional whiskey. And if you were to write a list of the top 20 distilleries of all time, you'd probably find that at least 8 of them came from Islay, which is phenomenal for an island that's currently has about 3,000 people on it and it's 26 miles across. So we've wanted to be part of that for a long time. We're not looking to build a completely old-fashioned traditional distillery, although there is, in terms of liquid, our driver is to make the whiskies that we love. So I often say when Sukhinder talks about liquid, he'll say to me, what do you want to make? And he'll go Longmore 1969 and Bowmore 1968, and these are the styles I want. But from a production point of view, we are looking at how we can make it as green as possible, so carbon neutral, carbon zero. We're looking at the techniques we can employ from new technologies, whether that's how we drive the stills or taking technology or learnings from other industries, so to do with fermentation, and we're taking from beer, we're also taking from rum, and taking understandings that we found certainly over the last 7 years since we've been working on the project, but also Sukhinder's 30-40 years worth of experience. And we're trying to put something together where we can bring all that understanding and then create liquid that has the flavors that we think the most special whiskies have, while at the same time being part of the community that we're joining and bringing the kind of family feel that we've got as a company to that island. A lot of the distilleries are owned by multinationals who do an awful lot for the place, and they do an awful lot for the industry. But as a smaller company, we can be a little bit more nimble and a little bit more responsive.
Agile, I think, is a good word.
Agile is a good word, yeah. And we're not. We're not, because we always overthink everything and take our time. But...
So when do you expect to start building? So
we're hoping we're hoping to cut ground at sometime, hopefully towards the end of the year or end of the summer. I got a phone call today because there's archaeologists on the site digging today. So a couple of people thought we'd started digging already, but we're just searching the site. But that's the plan, and we hope that we can start distilling in 2023. That's where we'd like to be. But these things often take longer than you hope. Certainly, this project has so far. But we're moving quite fast now, which is nice.
So when are we all moving to Islay? That's the isn't it?
We can discuss it next week when I'm at your house. We can.
Well, yeah, we could do that. Fantastic. So apart from the distillery on Islay, which is obviously very exciting, I'm sure everyone at home is very excited to follow the progress. Is there anything else you guys are up to which we should know about? Any other plans or any new bottling lines or anything that you might be interested in? Yeah,
so we're always doing bits and pieces. There's an idea every minute. We don't get them all done. We're lucky because we've got so many different labels that we bottle under, whether that's Single Malts of Scotland or Elements of Islay or Port Askaig. We're actually just kind of reworking elements of Isla at the moment in terms of the core lines and doing some reblends and making some interesting liquid. We've also got liquid coming through that we laid down ourselves 7 years ago. So there's some really interesting cask stuff coming through. Our plan for Port Askaig for the year is actually a little bit drawn back this year. We did 2 bottlings last year. So we did our spring last spring, and we did autumn in the autumn, which is still available in some retailers. But this year we're not planning to do any kind of big release as such. We're instead concentrating on working with some of our best retailers, such as Berry Brothers and Rudd, and some of the other friends in Scotland, to do a few kind of single cask releases for the UK. And these tend to be the casks where, when we've been doing bigger batches of whether it's like 15-year-old or 100 proof, where we found really interesting bits of stock. For me, that's probably the most fascinating thing, is when you buy a parcel of whiskey, you think you bought one thing, and then the samples turn up and are completely different. And part of the fun is then how you turn that into something and how you react to that. So there'll be a few interesting releases, almost all of them liquid driven, which is something I'm very keen on. So we respond to the liquid we find rather than make a brand plan and try and find liquid for it. It's just frankly not my cup of tea. Hopefully it makes for better bottlings.
Yeah, I'm 100% sure it does. And I'm 100% sure that there are people in your position in other companies that wish they could have the same policy. Shh. Now, just before we close, I wanted to pick your brain about your current thoughts on the global whiskey industry and the direction it's heading in. And is there anything that you've seen that really excites you, or do you have any concerns regarding the future of the whiskey industry? All in a little nutshell, please.
I guess I have on both sides. So through the Distillery project, I'm really excited about green energy and distilling and how that comes through. And I realize that's probably a big talking point at the moment, and it sounds probably a bit cliche to say it, but when your life is sadly revolving around boilers, as mine is currently, it is really fascinating to look at distilleries such as Ardnamurchan, who have really kind of pioneered green energy in distilling, and seeing where that goes, but also how that changes production. Because one of the most interesting things, like from a whiskey bottle history, is when you look back at older vintages of whiskies and different makes, you can see how their production changed, often either because of economics or because of new technologies. So whether that's a drive to make more liquid cheaper, and or the creation of things like distillers yeast, or the movement from direct fire to steam in stills, and all of that changes production and flavor. So we're living in a really interesting time, because over the next kind of 10 years, the whole industry is going to start moving towards green energy, and it's how that impacts flavor, or how we can make sure that we create the flavors we want using that energy. So I think that's probably the most exciting thing. In terms of the things that worry me, largely it's to do with cask investment and the way that changes. Obviously, as an independent bottler, I'm completely biased. For me, a cask of whiskey isn't an individual interesting asset until it's bottled. It's not interesting until someone said this is really good, puts it in a bottle, and other people agree and will buy it. Before that, it's just one of thousands and thousands of casks. And I do get concerned when I turn on social media and you see company after company after company claiming that you're going to get 40% returns, 50% returns per annum, which are all farcical numbers, based on buying perfectly nice makes that frankly nobody's really that interested in. So that's probably my biggest concern there.
Yeah, well, I think you're the first to mention that, but one of the concerns is similar. kind of similar lines, I guess, as the bottle flipping market as well. But it's just general. You can put it under one heading: exploitation, which is exploiting the liquid and exploiting people as well. I think
it's certainly sad. Like the bottle flipping side. I mean, I kind of see that both ways, because I understand why people buy whiskey and sell it. I get that. Look, that's the heart and soul of our company, not flipping, but buying whiskey and selling it. That's where a retailer, at the end of the day, that's what you do. Mm-hmm. And the internet has largely democratized that. So, it's very difficult to sit as a retailer and be like, how dare these people buy whiskey and sell it? What's sad is when whiskey becomes just a commodity and it's not a drink. But what you could say is, it's that desperation to try everything. I'm as guilty as anybody of owning too many bottles of whiskey. I'm unlikely to drink every bottle that I own without dying from doing so. So then the question is, why am I buying the bottles? What's the point of that? And that's the drive. That's the drive that we probably all need to look at a little bit, and maybe step back from buying the bottle that's being flipped that you probably might not need. And then that becomes just a thing between collectors and investors. And that's, fine, off you go, collect and invest. There's so much good whiskey. I mean, that was the thing that I realized the other day is, if you just want a really good bottle of whiskey, you can go onto almost any whiskey retail website at the moment and find it. I picked up a bottle of Elixir 18-year-old, which is outstanding, really drinkable, and I think it was on deal, so it was about 60 quid, 65 quid. It's an absolute bargain price. Yeah. It's disappointing when you want to try new distilleries or new product. I completely understand that, but if it's just about finding a good drink, there's always things you can find.
Yeah, that's very true. I was quite delighted the other day. I walked into local Majestic and they had Hibiki Harmony on the shelf.
Oh, nice.
Which, as far as I can tell, is pretty hard to get hold of these days. So
yeah,
I've only got that much of it left now.
It is difficult when you think back, and I think that we're all probably guilty of doing that, when you think back to those days where you could walk into any shop and buy anything you wanted, and it all felt like it was cheap and free. And certainly that doesn't happen now. And we're really aware as an independent bottler, when you bottling a single cask and it sells out and everyone's upset, you do feel it, but you kind of want to say, look, there's another cask, right?
Yeah, there'll be other whiskey.
There's about 10,000 of them sitting in the back, and we'll get round to them at some point. So
yeah, exactly.
I find that side irksome. The cask investment I find dangerous, because I think it hits at the industry at large, and it will affect the price of bottled stock. And that, for me, when independent bottlers in 10 years' time, or even in 2 or 3 years' time, are really struggling to buy whiskey that they can afford to put in a bottle, that's when you've got a real problem, because suddenly the good new whiskey just won't exist. It will, but it'll only come from distillery bottlings, and that would mean losing something that, for me, is probably one of the most interesting parts of Scotch whiskey as a category.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's end on a positive, and say, I think you're absolutely right. The green credentials, and go back to what you were talking about, I think that's come up quite regularly, and I think I was talking actually to David Miles from Edrington Beam Centurion about the work they're doing at Glengeary, which is obviously a very old distillery.
Yeah.
But it would appear that by bringing back some of the older processes, the direct firing of the wash still and a few other bits and pieces, that plus I imagine certain other equipment, but apparently it's going to save 15% off their current carbon footprint, which is obviously a positive. So it's good to see big distillers actually looking at that, as well as the smaller guys as well.
Yeah, well, there's a drive. It's really like we've been going. Isla's probably one of the most extreme examples of this, because it's so reliant on fuel coming onto the island. But ironically, it has, as an island, it should be a power creator. It has so much wind, or it could have so much wind and wave energy. What it really needs is investment. It needs investment from government to put in the infrastructure so Isla can bring that energy onto the island, and also so Isla can send that energy off the island, neither of which currently exist. But it's interesting when you start speaking to the distillery companies about that. You know, it's really key to them, because at the end of the day, they can't run their distillery if there's no power. And it's really good to see that every company at every level is looking at ways that they can bring that energy to being carbon zero, and not just carbon neutral, but carbon zero is the aim. You know, that's what you have to be aiming for, is not spending anything. And there are some really good examples, modern examples of distilleries that already do this. So, you know, Girvan as a grain distillery is a net giver to the energy grid, which is insane. So they not only make grain whiskey, and in my mind, one of the best grain whiskies you can find for using in blends. It's superb, but they also make more energy than they use. Now, admittedly, it's on a very big scale, but there's bits of learnings that distillery companies can take from that, and you can start using that energy. And on Isla, that already happens at Bamor. You know, there's so much 80-degree heat produced by a distillery that is completely useless to production. Like it's that you can't use it to power your stills. You can't use it for anything meaningful, but it's there, so you can use it to power schools. You can use it to heat houses. So for me, it's probably the most exciting area, because it's where technology's changing rapidly, but it's also giving us opportunities. Like direct fire is a really fascinating one for us. How you recreate that. We're in a slightly different boat, because we're not looking to reduce the carbon footprint. We're looking to have no carbon footprint, but we would like to have those bits of technology. But there are solutions. Some of them very experimental, but there are solutions, and it is really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, we could talk for many more minutes and hours, I'm sure, but sadly we have to leave it there. But I would like to say thank you to Ollie for turning up and telling us about the Port Askaig and all the developments at Elixir Distillers. So I'm going to say Slanjavar to yourself. No, you don't. Have you got a glass? You've got a glass. Well, look forward to seeing you soon. And hopefully we can all get back together safely in the not too distant future. So Ollie, Slanjavar, mate.
Slanjavar, Eddie.
Goodbye to you viewers. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.